Good afternoon. You know what was really fun about this, Beverly, was when you called up and said, you get to talk about anything you want to talk about, so tell us what you're passionate about. Well, that made some little complications for me because I'm a nurse leader. We're passionate about a lot of things. But I thought, well, you know, there is one thing that I really do want to talk about, and it's the specialty of leadership and management. Because even in 2016, I don't think that people appreciate what they have in nursing leaders and in nursing management. And I think that includes our own colleagues in our own profession. So since you gave me this time, I'm going to talk about my passion, and then we'll talk a little bit more about anything that you want to talk about, either about that or something else. So I titled it, Why It's a Special Specialty. And the reason I did that is because most nurses, when you talk to them, talk about their specialty, right? I'm a cardiac nurse. I'm a med-surg nurse. I'm a mental health nurse. But they don't talk much about nursing management being a specialty. And it really is. And because we don't talk about it, we don't treat it like a specialty. We don't figure out all the things that make it special. Now, some people do. We have CGEN that works on the education for us for nursing management. We have certifications. AONE has a certification for nursing management and one for nursing executive practice. But in general, when people think about nursing and specialties, I don't think they understand what it takes. So I want to talk a little bit about that. So there's myths about managers out there, and maybe you all could tell me some of them. And one of those myths is what? She used to be a nurse. She's now a manager. One of them. That's a myth. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. There's another myth that some of my colleagues years ago used to even spread, years ago. I know that doesn't happen anymore, but I remember reading a letter to the editor in one of the nursing journals many years ago from what was once called a director of nursing, so that tells you how long ago it might have been, that the top nursing person was called the director of nursing. And she wrote that she could do the job of any of her nurses and any of their units, and that's why she deserved to be the chief nurse. That's a myth that some people have, not quite the same as it is now. The myth now is, and it goes with the first myth of you're not a nurse anymore, is, well, how can you be my manager if you don't start an IV as well as I do? How can you be a manager if you don't know how to assess a patient as well as I do? Now, would you say to a mental health nurse specialist, how can you be a nurse if you don't know how to take care of a swan line? You wouldn't say that because they're all specialties, but that's one of the myths. And then the other myth, which isn't so prevalent anymore, and yet we're beginning to see it in our colleagues as they move into management. We're seeing it in our medical colleagues is, this person deserves to be a manager because they were the best clinician we ever saw. And not, when you don't realize that something's a specialty, then you make the mistake of putting the wrong people in the job. And then the other one is, this person deserves to be a manager, not always because they're the best surgeon I ever knew, but because it's the nicest guy or the nicest gal I know. All of those are myths because they are not understanding that this is a specialty just like any other. So I'm not going to ask you all right now because I only have 20 minutes, but I'll bet you that most of you did not go into nursing planning where you ended up or where you are going. And most of you didn't say when you applied to nursing school, I'm applying so I can be a chief nurse, or I'm applying so I can run the OR, or I'm applying, because we didn't know those things. So most of us became the leaders because we were either very nice people, they thought, oh, she'll get along with everybody, okay, that's good, or very good technicians, very good nurses, or it's beginning to, and this is just at the beginning, I think, the last 10 years, because people saw the real leadership there that was separate from the other skills. So a specialty is like a profession. It has its own research, it has its own body of knowledge, and it has evidence-based practice, just like any other specialty. Now, I don't know if you guys remember or if you've gone back and ever studied, and it wasn't that long ago, when I was first a nurse, there was a lot of discussion about who was really a professional and what was a profession. Some of you may remember that. The original profession was the clergy. They were the only ones that were professional, and that was quickly followed by law, and then after that, when medicine got organized, it was medicine. And those were, even in the early 70s, the three that were called professional. And nobody else was allowed to. I don't know if you remember this or not, but you weren't allowed to call yourself a professional because they were the professions. And if you'll remember, there were rules about how you could be called a professional. And it had to do with the body of knowledge, a body of education, and a body of research that was distinctly yours. So of course today, nursing is, of course it's a profession. And like the profession, each specialty has its own research and its own body of knowledge, which is why a nurse is not a nurse is not a nurse. Now, back when I first started nursing and I was in the Army, I could get pulled to mental health one day and the OR the next day. We now understand that it's just too sophisticated and we all have our specialties. And the same thing's true about management. So, you all have probably studied these, but this is why I think that we are a specialty that needs special attention. And that is, there have been theories about management since before Christ. There have been people who have written about who should lead others. Now, there were actual philosophers who talked about it, but mostly those who got to lead was might makes right. Remember that? Mostly you got to lead if you had the strongest army, right? If you could control people with might. And many, many of the early leadership and management ways of looking at things, which still have an effect today, had to do with the military and how you set things up in a hierarchical society, just the way that the military did. But since the early 1900s, late 1800s, 1900s, we've started with empirical research, and we've been theory-driven since the 1970s. So that's another reason why I say it's a specialty with a body of knowledge that we need to know and that we can use to become even better leaders than we are. I am going to ask this question because I can see you. How many of you, when you did your theses or your dissertations, remember a book called Stodgill's Book of Leadership? Okay, well, it's about this thick, okay? And it was originally done by a Professor Stodgill for many, many years. And when he died, it was passed on to a man named, and you might be too young to have known Stodgill, it was passed on to Bernard Bass. And it became Bass's Book of Leadership. Bernard Bass died in 2008. And that was the last time it was done. And I'm trying to figure out who is going to take this over because it's the most wonderful thing in the world. It's a book that's this thick, and it has all the known research ever done on management and leadership from the beginnings of time till 2008. And there's only a couple lines in it for every book, those of you who haven't seen it, but it's a wonderful place to go and read all the research and see how could people not think that nursing leadership, nursing management isn't a specialty with that much research on what's the right thing to do to how to treat people. Leadership and management are needed, important, they're studied, and they have best practices. So, why then, in 2014, did the Gallup report come out? You might have seen it in Harvard Business Review, which said that in their study, managers account for 70% of the variance in employee engagement scores, and only 30% of Americans are engaged. And in healthcare, we have a lot of unengaged people. Now, this particular percent is for the whole United States, but it's an issue in healthcare right now with all the things that are going on, that we have all these unengaged people. We have a lot of unengaged folks that are in healthcare. 18% of the current managers in the United States have the natural ability and talent to be managers, according to Gallup. Another 2 have the basic talent and can be educated. And what this Gallup report said is that companies hire the wrong manager 82% of the time. So I don't think we do that so much in nursing, but it's a good thing for us to think about as we develop the specialty of management and figure out, are we educating, training, and selecting the right people to lead into the future? So the rare individuals that Gallup found are not the best nurses. They are not the people with MBA after their name, surprise. They are not the best educated. They are people who do these things, and that's why I think nurses are natural leaders. They motivate, they have assertiveness, they create a culture of accountability, they build relationships, and they make decisions based on productivity, not politics. Now that last one, you might be thinking, is she talking about hours per patient day? No. For us, I would substitute the word productivity, because this is a general study for everybody, for value. I think that we look at value being quality balanced with cost. And many of the decisions that are made in hospitals today, and I'll talk about that in a minute, are so based on politics that we're going to have difficulty getting to value in the future if we do not figure out the politics. And frankly, there are politics between hospitals and medical staffs. There are politics between different departments. There are politics between people. And that gets in the way. And your best managers are the ones who make the decisions on what's right for the organization and the value. So I just wanted to tell everybody about the history of hospitals, because I think that we have forgotten them. One of my colleagues who's a physician said it was a lot better in the olden days when physicians ran all the hospitals. And I said, what olden days are you talking about? Because if you look at history, the original hospital medical centers had physicians running them. But the vast majority of hospitals were run by superintendents who were nurses. And in the late 1920s, there was a movement to change that. Now, the nurses who were running the hospitals at that time knew that they needed management education. So Teachers College had the first class on finance for the nurses who were running the hospitals, because they realized they needed to know that. So they supported that we needed more education to run hospitals. And the businessmen who supported the organizations at that time said, we have 3 horrible problems in hospitals and they need to be fixed. And these were very foreign to these problems were so difficult you would never believe them today. 1, there was a problem between physicians and hospitals not having aligned incentives. 2, there was not enough money to buy all the latest and greatest toys and equipment. Now, at that time, the most sophisticated equipment was a new potato masher for the kitchen, but there wasn't enough money to buy the technology. Okay? And 3, the cost of healthcare was getting too high, and the businessmen were tired of that. So, in 1929, Michael Davis wrote a book called Hospital Administration as a Career, The Need for Trained Executives for a Billion-Dollar Industry and How They May Be Trained. And as a result of this wonderful book, he started a program, and he was the first, led that program at the University of Chicago for hospital administration. And the nurses who were running the hospitals were quite excited until they found out that virtually no women would be admitted. So I'm not saying this to say, to be angry or anything about it, but I'm trying to tell you that management was not appreciated as a nursing ability, and for so long we haven't appreciated it as a nursing ability, and this is the types of things that happened in the past. And I always laugh and say, well, how's that working out for you? You got all those things solved. Just by changing who runs hospitals does not necessarily change whether or not we get our solutions. It is not about the profession. It is about the individuals we choose, whether they come from any walk of life. It's the individuals that we need to run our organizations. Okay, nurse leaders now and in the future. Well, we're going to need people who go out into the continuum, you know that. We're going to need people that have all the skills that we talked about before. We're going to need people who understand that it is a specialty and go and get the education and the certifications. And there is a strength in being an RN that we can bring to that because of the work that we've done in managing units and our patients. We need to lead across the continuum. We need to remember that clinical practice and management have to be tied together, and we could have a whole other class, and if we want to talk about that, about the need for nurse leaders who have been typically in hospitals to be managing the practice of nursing across the continuum and to be working closely with our advanced practitioners and helping them work together for the practice of nursing in a new and different way. We need to get out of the mess that the hospitals are in right now, and it's the same mess it was in 1929. It's all the same issues. One of the things that I do sometimes when I'm talking to groups is I take articles from the 20s, the 30s, the 40s. I cover up the date. I read them to people. I say, when did this happen? What's going on? And they know I'm trying to trick them, so they say, 10 years ago, but usually it is 30, 40, or 50 years ago. And until we recognize the importance of management as a specialty and leadership as a specialty, we will continue with those problems. So as we go forward, we know about shared governance, and there is a lot. You know the book I was telling you about? The evidence is pointing toward that's the right thing to do. Shared governance. Nursing has known that for a long time. Teams. The book that I was talking about, the latest research says that new organizations that are practicing the best new management based on evidence will do teams. They will do dyads, they will do triads, and they will be teams working together, and that the old hierarchies are not the way to move into the future to make sure that we are able to manage and lead well. Nursing knows that. So Management 101, I put that down there because I'm so often in a meeting where we're making decisions and I think, wait a minute, that's Management 101. We need to get back to the basics of looking at the research, as I've said, about what people need, what makes people feel like they're a part of something. So before I say this, I wanted to talk a little bit about one more thing, and that is how many of you are being told that you need transformational leadership in your organizations? Right? Anybody? Okay. What do you think we've practiced in healthcare since we started healthcare? Transactional. Transactional leadership. Transactional leadership says, I believe theory X, the old theory McGregor had back in the I think he started that theory right around the 1900s. The old theory X, theory Y. Theory X is people will only work hard if you pay them, and if you pay them well and you punish them when they do badly. Theory Y is people will work for something they believe that's bigger. And most of the theories since the 1900s have built on that. Although I will tell you, it was Mary Parker Follett, one of the first women in management leadership, who said it should be that there's psychology to it and that we need to understand the psychology and go forward. When we look at all of those theories going forward and understand that people are not just motivated by money, we will get out of transactional. I have a theory that one of the reasons that hospitals and physicians have not gotten along well is because we have treated everything like a transaction. You bring me patients, I'll make sure your income stays up. Always a reward instead of transformational, which is what is the greater good? What is it we can do to change the world? What is it we can do to change our community, and how can we do that together? So the latest research says that the people who will get us out of this mess are those who practice transformational leadership and authentic leadership, so that people know you are coming from your core, you are who you say you are, and you're going to be working for the greater good, and you don't believe that the only reason people work is for money or to have a transaction. So, thank you for being a nurse, but I'm also going to say the same thing I said this morning. And I think it needs to be said over and over and over again, and you need to say it to each other. It is hard to be a leader and a manager. Not everybody is cut out to do it. And if you are, and if you get your joy from doing that, you need to keep at it, stay strong, and thank you for choosing to lead. So, thank you.